Captain Rex Theron sat slouched in his command chair on the Starweaver, his fingers tapping out a restless rhythm against the crystalline control panel, while streams of quantum data floated lazily across the holographic displays. Another sweep through the dead nothing of Sector 7. He muttered to himself, laced with a sarcasm born of centuries of routine and repetition. After 300 solar cycles in deep space, the novelty had long since worn off the only thing duller than the vast, empty darkness outside the viewport was the bureaucratic insistence of the Galactic Science Council to map every single cubic parac of space, as if one more lifeless void would somehow change the course of known history. His thoughts were interrupted by the sharp, clipped voice of his sensor officer, Lieutenant Kirill. Her eyes wide, her posture rigid as she stared down at her instrument's captain. She said, cutting through the monotony, like a blade, "We're picking up something unusual." Theron straightened. Instantly, the edge in her voice enough to stir the instincts honed by a lifetime. "In space, define unusual," he said without missing a beat. She hesitated, her six-fingered hands flying across her console, her brows furrowed. "It's not following any known pattern," she explained. "The signal appears to be bouncing between quantum states in a way that shouldn't be possible. It's almost as if it's trying to get our attention." Theron leaned forward, his casual demeanor vanishing in an instant, his mind now fully. "Alert, show me!" He set his voice low and controlled the holographic display, shifted, revealing a bizarre and erratic stream of data waves that shimmered and danced through layers of dimensional phase spaces. Flickering in and out of perception, the bridge fell silent. Even the low hum of the ship's systems seemed to hold its breath alert. "First contact division," Theron ordered, knowing exactly who would answer the call. "And get me." Nova Blackwood within minutes, a tall, silver-skinned figure entered the bridge, moving with the fluid precision of someone who had spent decades adapting to artificial enhancements. Nova Blackwood, the Starweaver's first contact specialist, took in the scene with her augmented eyes, already processing more information than most organics could absorb in a lifetime. "What have you got, Rax?" she said. Skipping the formalities, they had worked together too long for ceremony. "Lieutenant, show her the data," Theron instructed. Vale expanded the holographic display, and the shifting patterns seemed to pulse in time with some unseen rhythm. Nova's expression shifted from curiosity to concern. "This is unlike anything we've ever recorded," she murmured. "The quantum signature suggests technology far more advanced than anything in the galactic archives, but there's something off about it, primitive, almost like someone built a quantum computer using stone tools." Theron blinked, trying to reconcile that image with the sheer complexity on display. How old is this signal? He asked the ships. AI answered immediately, based on decay patterns and drift estimates, approximately 100,000 standard years. Nova looked at Theron, their expressions mirroring disbelief. "That's impossible." They both said in unison. Lieutenant Vale added more fuel to the mystery. "The signal isn't just noise. There's a pattern embedded within it, something that resembles speech, but not from any known species. Assemble the research team," Theron said without hesitation. "All departments, top priority." Within the hour, the ship's primary research bay was buzzing with activity. Some of the most brilliant minds in the fleet were now poring over the strange signal. Dr. Xena Ray, the legendary quantum physicist whose work had revolutionized faster-than-light travel, floated into position on her anti-grav chair, her four arms manipulating equations in midair. With hypnotic precision, Professor Jin Chen, expert in xenolinguistics and author of the standard translation matrices, stood nearby, running speech pattern algorithms. Through layer after layer of filters, Nova Blackwood stood at the center, addressing the room with authority. "What we have here might be the most significant discovery in galactic history," she said calmly but firmly. "Whoever left this message, they intended it to be found." Her words hung in the air, like prophecy, and as if to punctuate her statement, the ship's lights flickered briefly. A chill ran down Theron's spine, just a fluctuation. He said, though his gut suggested otherwise, after centuries in deep space, you learn to trust your instincts, and his were screaming now that they were on the edge of something vast and possibly catastrophic. Professor Chen focused intently on her screen, frowning at the complex quantum patterns dancing across the interface. The structure is too ordered, too intentional to be random, she said, and Nova, peering over her shoulder, nodded in agreement. Can you filter out the quantum noise? She asked, already trying. Chen responded, her hands a blur across the holographic. Controls Dr. Ray joined her, their respective fields now overlapping in a desperate attempt to make sense of the anomaly working together. They applied a reverse entropy filter designed to compensate for temporal degradation. And then for a moment, the lab fell into silence, broken only by the low hum of the speakers, which suddenly crackled to life. A burst of static pierced the room. Everyone flinched. Then a voice emerged, processed and strained but unmistakably real language pattern identified, announced the AI accessing historical archives. Nova felt her synthetic skin crawl, her enhancements, detecting something deeply familiar and deeply impossible. That's a human voice. She whispered, Captain Theron entered the lab just in time to hear it, his own expression darkening with shock. Humanity, he said, a species thought extinct for over 100 millennia. The implications hung heavy over the lab. The data was too clear, too consistent. The signal had been preserved, bouncing through time and dimensions for 100,000 years, and now it had found them. Nova Blackwood stood motionless in the center of the research bay, her cybernetic eyes flickering with streams of quantum data as the human voice echoed again through the lab, the sound crisp, now unmistakable, and filled with a desperation that transcended time. It was not just noise, not just an ancient artifact. This was a message intentionally crafted and embedded within the quantum distortion, a warning preserved with purpose and directed toward whoever might be listening 100,000 years later. The voice cracked through the speakers again, fragments of words slipping through the noise. Warning to any who find this must run. Theron stared at the audio stream, then turned toward the ship's AI with sharp authority. Access all historical records, he said urgently. I want everything we have on Earth's destruction, on humanity's last days. The lab's main screen flickered as ancient fragmented data slowly came to life, most of it corrupted, some unreadable, but enough remained to tell the story. A vibrant blue-green planet, once teeming with life and innovation, reduced to floating debris in space. Its surface molten and blackened, the official records labeled it the Great Catastrophe caused by an experiment gone wrong, a leap into dimensional physics that shattered everything they understood. But Nova's sensors were picking up inconsistencies, subtle energy fluctuations embedded in the archived data readings that didn't match any known form of dimensional collapse. She stepped closer, eyes narrowing as her mind began to connect threads no one had seen before. These energy signatures don't belong here, she murmured, and she was right. They pulsed with a frequency that mirrored the signal they had just intercepted. Jin Chen's screen suddenly flashed, her voice rising with alarm. The signal is changing, she said. The patterns are reorganizing themselves. The data is shifting, revealing more of the original message. Static gave way to clarity, and the human voice returned stronger, more coherent, more terrifying. They're coming. Thought we could control it. Our greatest mistake. When you hear this run, the words echoed through the lab just as the lights dimmed again. Longer this time, and the temperature dropped, noticeably visible. Breath clouds hung in the air as the team froze in place. Theron's voice broke the silence. Run a full diagnostic. Now what could cause this kind of fluctuation? Dr. Ray's hands were already flying across her, console's eyes darting from equation to equation. The quantum signatures are alien, she said, completely foreign to anything we know, and yet they match the signal perfectly. It's like reality is starting to bend. Nova's enhancements pulsed rapidly as she fed the new data through every cybernetic filter she possessed. The message is not just a warning. She said slowly, it's a key. These fluctuations are not random. They're synchronized with the quantum signature in the signal, and that means they're part of it. Theron stepped closer. You're saying the message is doing this? No. She answered, her skin now glowing faintly. It's reacting to us the moment we found it. We activated something. The implications struck everyone at once. Nova turned toward the main console, trying to override the environmental systems, but the feedback loop was already beyond control. Energy spikes rippled through the ship corridors, shifted, and walls distorted like reality itself was stretching and pulling apart. The signal had not simply warned them, it had connected them to whatever destroyed Earth, and now that connection was awake. Lieutenant Ville's voice cracked over the intercom. Captain, we're detecting more anomalies readings. We can't explain systems behaving as if they're alive, data streams running backward and forward at once, time distortions and spatial folding, as if to emphasize her report. The lab's ceiling rippled like the surface of disturbed water, glowing cracks appearing in mid-air fractures, in space glowing with a light that made no sense. Captain Theron turned to Nova, eyes hard and steady. What did we awaken? Her voice dropped low and cold. I think we just found out why humanity vanished, and whatever they ran from it might be coming here now before anyone could respond. The signal burst through again, its clarity now chilling. It spoke directly into their minds, not through speakers but through the quantum distortion itself. To those who find this message, we tried to harness forces beyond our comprehension. We opened doors that should have remained closed. When you hear these words clearly, it will already be too late. They will have found you. Your only hope is to run the room plunged into darkness before emergency lights flared, red and weak, casting long shadows across the faces of those present. Nova's sensors locked onto new distortions smaller than before, but multiplying, spreading across the ship. Dr. Ray shouted from her station, the quantum core is behaving abnormally. Power readings are fluctuating between 0 and infinity, which shouldn't be possible. The safety systems are being bypassed by something we can't see or control. The warning was not a metaphor, it was literal. Whatever the humans had tried to contain had found them, and now it was moving through the cracks left open by the signal. Captain, we have to make a decision, Nova said, stepping forward, her voice tense and urgent. If we wait too long, this entire ship and everything in it could fall apart from the inside. Theron's antenna twitched as he absorbed the weight of the situation. The bridge reported similar anomalies, doors leading to nowhere, crew reporting impossible visions, and corridors folding onto themselves. The ship itself was losing structural and dimensional coherence. The Starweaver was becoming unstuck from the laws of reality, and it was accelerating fast. They listened to the voice again, this time not with disbelief, but with understanding. The warning to run wasn't a message of fear, but of time borrowed, a desperate plea from a civilization that had faced the unthinkable and made the only choice they had left to send the warning forward to buy time for the next one to carry the burden. Theron closed his eyes for a moment, trying to recall every training scenario, every contingency plan. Nothing prepared him for this. Nova's systems were processing at full capacity. She stepped back toward the signal origin. Her readings confirmed what she had feared. These fluctuations were not only spreading, they were stabilizing, which meant something was trying to come through. The energy patterns were forming structure, shape, direction, like a hand reaching through broken glass, trying to find purchase. Reality was no longer sealed, and they were no longer alone in the distance down the corridor. Lieutenant Ville's scream crackled through the intercom and then cut to silence. Theron and Nova exchanged a glance, then sprinted toward the source of the disturbance. As they ran, the walls shifted around them. What should have taken seconds stretched into minutes, the passage folding in on itself. They arrived at the medical bay to find Professor Jin Chen standing frozen in place, her eyes wide with horror. She pointed to what looked like empty space. But it wasn't. It moved, twisted the air, bent around it like a heat mirage gone wrong, and near it floated the form of a crew member who was both there and not there. His body existed in multiple states at once, fractured like a quantum particle unable to collapse into one. Reality. Parker Nova whispered, recognizing the ensign that had been assigned to the lower deck, and yet he wasn't Parker anymore, he was everywhere and nowhere. The signal hadn't just brought a message, it had reopened the wounds humanity had sealed. The entities were returning, and this time, there would be no warning, only the consequences of knowing too late what boundaries should never be crossed. And as Nova looked into the spreading fracture before her, she realized that the moment they chose to listen was the moment their fate had begun to mirror that of Earth, a cycle repeating itself across the fabric of the universe, a loop of ambition, hubris, and ultimately, the desperate plea left behind for anyone to understand before the final moment arrived, and all that remained was the word run. The atmosphere aboard the Starweaver had shifted from tense to nearly unmanageable as the crew scrambled to interpret what they were seeing and hearing. The signal continued to evolve, revealing more of its embedded message with each fluctuation in the quantum field. And now, the data itself was becoming unstable, just as Nova had feared. The lab was inundated with overlapping sensor readings and visual anomalies. Holographic projections shorted out before reforming with distorted geometries, as if the data they displayed no longer obeyed consistent rules of time or space. Dr. Ray shouted above the rising cacophony. The fluctuations are matching the waveform of the signal exactly. It's like we're inside the message. Now Jin Chen's hands trembled as she manipulated her translation matrix, her eyes wide with disbelief. This is no longer just data. This is living code. It's reacting to our presence and updating in real time. The air around them felt denser, colder. Time seemed to slow down, then snap forward again, as if even the ship's artificial gravity was being bent by the forces leaking in from the other side. Then the voice returned. But this time, there was no static, no distortion. It spoke directly and clearly to every mind on the Starweaver. We thought we could control it. We thought the boundaries of reality were just doors waiting to be opened. The truth is, we never understood the cost. When you hear this, it means it has found you. The lab fell into silence as the message ended. Nova's synthetic skin shimmered under the emergency lighting, her internal systems racing to stabilize as new streams of data poured through her neural interface. Captain Theron stepped forward, his voice level but firm. What do you mean? It's found us. Nova turned slowly to face him, eyes glowing with quantum feedback. The message was never just a warning. It was a trigger, a beacon that connects everything. The signal, Earth, the entities, whatever we just tapped into, it's following the same path through time. And now that we've listened, now that we've engaged, it knows where we are. The temperature dropped further, condensation formed on the walls, and several crew members began reporting double vision and auditory hallucinations. The ship's AI issued a diagnostic warning. Reality distortion fields are expanding beyond containment. Crew members are advised to avoid unnecessary movement in affected areas. Engineering reported that power systems were fluctuating uncontrollably, despite being shut down, and the corridors leading to the core had begun looping in impossible directions. Spatial readings showed that some sections of the ship were now occupying more than one location. At once, Nova accessed the core feed, and what she saw made her pause completely. The quantum reactor, at the heart of the Starweaver, was pulsing in sync with the signal despite all safety systems and overrides. The containment fields were being rewritten by instructions encoded within the signal itself. Captain, she said, we're not just listening to this message anymore, we're becoming part of it. It's integrating with our systems, our space, our ship. The voice returned again, repeating its final words with a new emphasis: run. Until you find a way to seal the barriers, run. Until you're ready to pay the price. We paid. It was not just a desperate echo, it was a challenge, a transfer of burden from one civilization to another. Dr. Ray stepped away from her terminal, her forearms, gesturing to the main screen, which now showed a series of cascading equations. "They're trying to show us something," she said, breathless. "These aren't just random data streams. This is a framework. The last thing humanity tried before the end, a way to seal the dimensional rifts, the final act of a species pushed beyond the brink of understanding." Jin Chen studied the data, her voice quiet, with dawning realization. This is not just a warning. This is a blueprint, a key. Nova confirmed, translating rapidly through her enhancements. Humanity didn't just want us to run, they wanted someone to finish what they started, to carry the knowledge forward. And maybe prevent this from ever happening again. Captain Theron paced the lab, his antenna twitching as the enormity of the situation began to set in. The human message wasn't a tombstone, it was a relay. A passing of a torch left adrift in time. And now that torch had landed in their hands, Dr. Ray approached with another burst of decoded data, her expression grim. They created a process, a containment protocol, using quantum field conversion to reinforce the dimensional fabric. But the energy requirements are immense. We're talking about total conversion of all matter within the affected region. Pure quantum detonation. Theron stared at the schematics, then out through the lab's viewport, where the stars now shimmered with distortions, like cracks on the surface of water. Through those fractures, they could all see movement, subtle at first, but growing more pronounced forms without shape, geometries that bent perception, things that should not exist but did. And now we're coming closer. Nova's eyes locked on. "Theron, you know what this means? Captain, the humans did not destroy Earth out of failure. They sacrificed it. The energy required to seal the first breach was so vast, they used their entire world to do it. And now if we want to survive, we have to make the same choice." Theron's jaw tightened as he listened to her words, the crew around him still working feverishly, trying to stabilize what remained of their ship, their world, and their sense of reality. All of it slipping piece by piece into something beyond comprehension. Lieutenant Ville's voice returned over the intercom, calm, but with an eerie resonance. "Multiple breaches detected, all decks affected, quantum destabilization accelerating. We are now on countdown to containment failure." The message from humanity began to play again, as if it understood the urgency, repeating not with despair, but with resolve. "When you hear this message, clearly they've already found you. The doors are opening. Reality is thin run." Nova stepped forward, projecting the final segment of the human archive around them. The holograms showed Earth in its final moments, cities evacuating, scientists working against impossible timelines, and then the flash as their planet dissolved into energy, fueling the last desperate act to seal the breach. The realization hit the crew of the Starweaver like a wave, not fear but understanding, not escape, but sacrifice. They had reached the same moment in their story, and now faced the same choice. Nova turned to Theron. "The quantum equations are executable," she said. "We can adapt them to our core. But once the process starts, there is no turning back. It's all or nothing." He nodded slowly, then turned to the crew. "Send the message to every ship, every world within reach. Tell them what happened here. Tell them why we had to do this, and tell them that humanity was right." He looked back toward the viewport, where the fabric of space continued to fracture. And beyond it, the entities came closer, unimpeded, relentless and hungry. In that final moment, as the countdown began, and the core built toward detonation, the Starweaver crew understood their role not as explorers, not as scientists, but as the next link in a chain forged across time and desperation. A chain that might one day finally hold back the void. Nova placed her hand on the core console, her skin pulsing with energy. The human voice echoed one last time run, and they knew exactly what it meant. Not retreat, not surrender, but duty survival, and the hope that one day someone else would hear and be ready to run just far enough to save everything again. The decision to act weighed, heavier than any command Captain Theron had ever given, standing on the bridge of the Starweaver, surrounded by flickering lights, fractured data streams, and a crew doing everything they could to maintain order. In the face of unraveling reality, he felt the crushing pressure of the moment ahead of him through the cracked viewport. He could see space rippling like water, the distant stars bending and stretching into impossible patterns as the dimensional breaches widened, and from within those, fractures. They could now clearly see the entities vast and incomprehensible, moving in geometries that defied logic and form. They were getting closer, drawn to the ship, the signal, the activation that humanity had left behind. And the crew understood now that this wasn't an accident. This was a torch passed across time, a responsibility forced upon whoever uncovered the warning. And chose to listen. Nova stood at the core terminal, her skin now glowing with steady pulses of quantum energy. Her enhancements interfacing directly with the ship's systems as she fed the human equations into the reactor core, adapting them to the architecture of the Star Weaver. Dr. Ray stood beside her, translating the last fragments of Earth's preserved data streams, every variable, every calculation, confirming the terrifying truth: the process would work, but only through complete conversion of all matter within the affected region into pure energy, the same terrible price humanity had paid, sacrificing an entire planet to seal the first breach. Jin Chen watched silently from a corner of the lab, her face pale, her hands trembling as she processed the enormity of what they were about to do. Reality outside was continuing to collapse, more tears opening every minute, and through them came the flickers of movement and sound that clawed at sanity. The voice of the human message returned again, repeating, with eerie calm, "Run until you find a way to seal the barriers. Run until you are ready to pay the price we paid." This time, the message felt like a passing of judgment, not just a warning, but an expectation. Theron paced the bridge, ignoring the spatial distortions that now bent the air around his feet. Corridors were folding in on themselves, rooms shifting locations, sensors failing to register known parameters. The very laws of physics were breaking down around them, and it was accelerating. Dr. Ray's voice came through the comms again. "The reactor is ready. Core modifications are complete. We're holding it stable, for now. But we can't maintain this state for more than a few minutes. If we wait too long, we lose control. And the breach spreads beyond recovery." Nova's voice followed hers, calm, focused, but with a finality that left no room for argument. "Captain, when we activate the core, there will be no survivors. The process will erase everything in range, the matter. Energy conversion will be total." Theron looked at the viewport, one last time, seeing not just the collapse, but what lay beyond the entities, observing them now, clearly aware of their presence, waiting just beyond the veil of reality for the final tier to open and let them flood through. Behind them, he could see glimpses of their realm, a place of impossible shapes, colors that should not exist, and forms that bent light around them like gravity itself feared their presence. He turned to his crew, sending a general broadcast to every station. "On the ship, I want everyone to send their final messages. Now tell your families what we did here. Tell the galaxy what happened and why we had no choice. Let the record show that we did not act out of fear, but out of duty to the future. To those who come after us, Lieutenant Ville at Communications." Her voice, quiet but firm. "Confirmed messages are being transmitted. Emergency frequencies open and broadcasting repeating loop initiated." Jin Chen's terminal beeped with one final decoded data stream. She rushed to Nova with it. "Look at this," the message. "It's more than just instructions. There's a final failsafe, a sequence to be activated. Within the last 10 seconds of the core cycle, it stabilizes the barrier, reduces quantum backflow, and increases containment radius by nearly 30%. We can protect more space than we thought." Nova took the data, processed it instantly, and nodded. "Good, it might be the edge we need." She uploaded the final sequence into the core interface, and the countdown began. 10 minutes to activation. The ship's hull creaked with pressure, and the lights throughout the vessel flickered, in chaotic rhythm matching the pulse of the entities approaching. They were drawing closer. With each second, their presence pressing against the barriers of reality, like fingers on thin ice. Lieutenant Ville reported again, "The quantum anomalies are spreading. We've lost contact with half the decks, and the reactor's gravity fields are beginning to fluctuate. We have maybe 6 minutes before complete internal collapse." Dr. Ray relayed that the reactor was at capacity, the modifications stable, and the sequence locked into place, waiting only for Theron's final authorization. He looked at his crew, their faces lit by the sickly glow of emergency lighting, each one knowing what came next. Nova looked at him directly, her voice soft and steady. "We're ready, Captain." Theron exhaled slowly, then gave the order. Initiate sequence now. Dr. Ray engaged the core, and across the ship, a deep hum began to rise. As the quantum conversion process started, the air grew thicker. The pressure of space itself seemed to lean inward, and the tears in reality paused for a brief moment, as if the very universe sensed what was about to happen. The voice from the human message spoke again, but now with purpose and resolve. "Run not because of fear, but because you have the time to act. Run to make the sacrifice count." The core pulsed with increasing intensity, building to critical mass. Nova and Dr. Ray monitored the readings, their bodies locked into their work as the ship began to shake more violently than ever before. Theron stood, still as chaos erupted around him. Alarms blared, panels sparked, data streams overloaded. But the countdown continued, relentless, inevitable. Jin Chen transmitted the final update to the Galactic Network packaging. Every shred of human data, every detail of their findings, every calculation of what the entities were and how they broke through. Her last message ended with a simple plea. "Remember what we did and do not forget the cost." At 30 seconds, the core began to glow with a blinding light, casting everything in harsh white brilliance. And the crew braced themselves, knowing that these were their last moments. Nova turned to Theron one last time. "The barrier will hold," she said. "I believe it will." Theron gave a single nod, then turned to face the viewport, standing tall as the countdown reached its final moments. The entities surged forward one last time, breaking through the final veil, reaching for the Starweaver as if to stop them, but they were too late. The human voice echoed once more, "Run," and the core detonated in a flash of energy brighter than any star. Every atom aboard the Starweaver was converted into raw quantum force. The breach collapsed, the tiers sealed, and the entities were pushed back, locked away once more behind the rebuilt wall between realities and across the galaxy. Those listening to the broadcast, those who had received the final message, would remember not just the sacrifice, but the lesson that some boundaries are not meant to be crossed. Some knowledge carries too great a price, and that, in the end, the only way to stop what lurks beyond is to be willing to do what humanity did, to run not in fear, but in hope, to run far enough to give the next ones a chance to stand, and when their time comes, to choose again between destruction and sacrifice. They will know what it takes to keep the darkness out. The moment the core detonated, the universe seemed to hold its breath. The blinding flash of energy erupted outward, consuming everything within the sector and converting it into pure quantum force. The surge tore through the fabric of space, closing the breaches and sealing away the entities that had begun to pour through the rift. The barrier formed not as a wall of metal or light, but as a field of stabilized dimensional law, a restoration of reality itself, reinforced by the sacrifice of every atom aboard the Starweaver. Within seconds, the ship was gone, erased not by failure, but by choice, by necessity, by the same desperate courage that had once driven humanity to make the same sacrifice 100,000 years earlier. And just as it had been, then the price was paid in full. But the story did not end with silence, for beyond the sealed fractures and newly reinforced barriers, something remained: a pulse, a signal traveling through stabilized space. Riding on the echoes of the sacrifice, it was the final message of the Starweaver, encoded in the same layered quantum frequencies as the ancient human transmission, a continuation not just of knowledge, but of purpose across deep space. The signal reached relay satellites and long-range listening posts. Its code instantly recognized as emergency level priority Alpha 0, the highest possible alert. It was a warning, a confession, and a gift. Embedded within it was the full archive of the events leading to the Star Weaver's destruction, including the preserved records of humanity's final days and the complete mathematical framework for the containment sequence they had enacted in their final moments. Across the galactic network, researchers, scientists, and military strategists pored over the data, attempting to understand the true scale of what had happened and what had been narrowly prevented. The initial reaction was disbelief, followed quickly by horror. The signal told a story that rewrote known history. Humanity's extinction was no longer the result of technological overreach or civil collapse. It had been a sacrifice, a deliberate act of cosmic defense. And now that story was continuing in the most terrifying way possible. The breaches had returned, and with them, the entities had begun to push once more against the walls of reality. And it was only through the actions of the Star Weaver's crew that they had been stopped for now, in hidden research stations on distant moons, on orbiting outposts, and deep within the classified networks of interstellar governments. Debate raged: should the public be told, should the truth be shared or buried, to avoid panic? But the message made it clear it was not just a record, it was a relay. And someone had to be next, because even sealed barriers erode over time. And what had come once would surely try again. The message concluded with a voice not synthetic, not distorted, but the last words of Captain Theron recorded and preserved in the moments before the final activation. He spoke calmly, with quiet conviction, to those who received this message. We did not choose to die, we chose to stand. Humanity gave us the knowledge, the means, the warning. They gave us everything we needed to make the choice. We only pray that when your time comes, you will have the courage to do the same. That moment became legend, studied in classrooms, analyzed in strategic think tanks, memorialized in monuments built not on worlds, but on data streams that could never be erased across the galactic community. Awareness spread that reality itself was not immutable, and that breaches into other dimensions were not just theoretical dangers, but catastrophic certainties waiting for the next act of curiosity or arrogance to tear open again. Protocols changed. Weapons were developed. New containment strategies were tested and implemented, but none could match the simplicity and brutality of the human solution. When faced with an unstoppable force, the only answer was sacrifice of equal magnitude. And thus, a new doctrine was born. The doctrine of equivalence, the understanding that for every breach there must be a payment for every violation of reality, a restoration of equal weight. As the centuries passed, the Star Weaver's sacrifice was neither forgotten nor duplicated, but always present, always monitored. Every deep space signal, every anomaly, every fluctuation in quantum behavior was analyzed in the shadow of that final message. And yet, despite all precautions, the question remained, when not, if the entities would return again, because time does not heal wounds. In reality, it only hides them. And just as the humans had predicted, the signal began to repeat its strength, undiminished, its clarity absolute. Run until you are ready to pay the price we paid in private chambers, far from the eyes of the public. Select leaders and scientists met regularly to update the breach probability models. Using data from the Star Weaver and from Earth's archives, they calculated the likelihood of another incident, not in thousands of years as they once believed, but in decades, maybe sooner. And so, contingency plans were drafted. Vast fleets prepared, entire sectors quietly evacuated under the guise of natural instability. But at the heart of every plan was a singular truth, understood and dreaded. The only true response would once again be sacrifice. The signal from the Star Weaver had not just saved the galaxy, it had exposed its fragility. The lie that reality was permanent and unassailable had been shattered, and what remained was the burden of vigilance centuries later. A new ship on a distant frontier would pick up something strange. A flicker in the quantum bands, a signal echoing across dimensional states with patterns that bore haunting resemblance to the ones from long ago, and aboard that ship, a young captain would hear a voice not from their crew, not from any known source, but from a past carried forward through time and necessity. A voice that whispered clearly into their mind, "Run," and in that moment, the cycle would begin again. Not from ignorance, but from knowledge. Not from arrogance, but from preparation. And perhaps this time with the combined wisdom of two lost civilizations, they might find a way not only to run, but to fight, to endure, to finally end the cycle and seal the barriers forever. Until then, the message would travel through the stars, a light in the dark, a voice beyond time. A warning and a promise carried forward by those willing to pay the price to keep the universe safe from the things that waited patiently beyond the edge of reality. In the aftermath of the Star Weaver sacrifice, as the quantum barrier solidified and the entities were sealed once more, behind a wall of pure stabilized dimensional force, the galaxy stood at a crossroads. The signal had been received. The truth had been broadcast, and civilizations across the stars now faced the reality that what had once been dismissed as myth or cautionary tale was in fact the foundation of their survival. Humanity's final act had not only bought time, but changed the course of understanding across countless worlds, and as that knowledge settled into the consciousness of those who governed, defended, explored, and researched, the weight of it began to manifest in urgent and irreversible ways. Emergency meetings were held behind sealed doors across the Galactic Council, where the representatives of over 100 species gathered to examine the full breadth of the data transmitted by the Star Weaver, the testimony of Captain Theron, the calculations of Dr. Ray, the visual records of the breach, and the final words of the human warning message played again and again, etched into their collective awareness as a defining moment in galactic history. Security leaders across allied systems revised their threat matrices, elevating dimensional instability to the highest category of existential risk. Entire sectors were re-evaluated for potential breaches. Any anomaly that even remotely echoed the quantum fluctuations described in the Star Weaver's report was immediately flagged for deep analysis. Containment task forces were formed, comprised of physicists, engineers, and tactical experts trained not for war, but for something far more abstract and terrifying, the defense of reality itself. And yet, despite this new vigilance, the unease remained deep and spreading, for if humanity had once triggered such a catastrophe in pursuit of energy and advancement, then what prevented another civilization from unknowingly walking the same path? The truth was brutal in its simplicity. It could happen again, not just because of curiosity, but because progress demands risk, and risk often blinds itself to consequence. The signal from the Star Weaver carried a warning, but also something else, something more profound, a realization that survival was no longer about politics, or technology, or military power. It was about responsibility, the kind that transcends species, borders, ideologies, and even time itself. To understand that some doors should never be opened, and that those who do not learn from the sacrifices of others are doomed to repeat them in full measure. This awareness began to shift galactic policy in ways not seen since the Unification Wars. Entire research programs were shut down, those involving dimensional theory or quantum experimentation. Outside the now heavily regulated zones, access to data related to interdimensional physics was locked behind encryption protocols so advanced, only a select few were allowed to even request them. Containment stations were established at the edge of known space, staffed permanently by autonomous AI and rotating crews with emergency quantum field dampeners ready to trigger a localized collapse should any breach be detected. But even with all these precautions, the fear could not be erased, because the Star Weaver had proven that once the breach began, it could not be negotiated with, reasoned with, or fought in any conventional sense. It could only be sealed, and sealing it required sacrifice. The doctrine of equivalence, as it came to be known, was integrated into every level of galactic strategic planning. A grim axiom that stated for every dimensional intrusion, a response of equal or greater energy must be deployed to maintain universal integrity, and that meant that in future events, the question would never be how to save the ship or the planet, but whether the lives lost would be enough to restore balance. Nova Blackwood's final transmission became required study for all Academy graduates. Her calm voice describing the activation of the core, the calculation of the energy radius, the understanding that they would not survive, but that their deaths would buy a future echoed through lecture halls and strategic simulations. It was no longer about heroism. It was about realism, about choosing to act before the breach became irreversible, and knowing that inaction doomed billions, not just on your own world but across the stars. As the years passed, the story of the Star Weaver shifted from recent tragedy to foundational myth, a moment of clarity in an age of confusion, a line in time drawn sharply between before and after, and still, the signal repeated, carried by deep space buoys, maintained by silent automated stations. Its quantum code constantly monitored for signs of change, for embedded keys that might one day offer something more than sacrifice, perhaps even hope. But for now, its purpose remained simple. It was a voice echoing through the dark, a reminder to every explorer, every leader, every researcher and dreamer that reality was not unbreakable, and that the things beyond it were not gone, only held back by the choices of those who had come before and those yet to come. And somewhere far from the heart of the galaxy, aboard a quiet science vessel on the edge of charted space, a technician noticed a fluctuation, a minor irregularity in the signal frequency. Nothing serious at first, but as they focused, as they calibrated their instruments, they realized it was not just static, it was new data, new layering woven into the existing pattern. Not a warning this time, but something else, something structured like coordinates or instructions, or perhaps a response to the sacrifices made. And in that moment, the technician understood what would soon spread across the network, that the story was not over, that the Star Weaver had not just died to seal the breach, but to start something greater. And that now, the galaxy stood at the beginning of the next chapter, and the message once more echoed through the relay in the voice of Captain Theron, calm and resolute. When you hear this, you will have a choice: run and seal the breach, or wait and watch it grow. But know this: every second matters, every decision counts, and the next move is yours. Across the vast silence of space, the warning persisted. Its voice carried through the stars, no longer just a memory of humanity's final moments, but now a legacy of purpose, passed on to those who remained. The message was clear, its urgency: absolute run, until you are ready to pay the price we paid. And for many it was seen as a call to arms, for others, a grim reminder of their own fragility. But for the few who truly understood, who had seen the data, the math, the records, and the cost, it was something deeper. It was a covenant between past and present, between those who had sacrificed everything and those who would one day face the same choice. Aboard the containment stations scattered at the galactic edge, silent monitors blinked quietly, analyzing spatial integrity and quantum coherence, always watching, always listening for the next tremor in the fabric of the universe. For years, no anomalies. Came the breaches sealed, the entities silenced, but the memory remained etched into every safety protocol, into every warning plaque engraved beneath the core reactors of exploration vessels and deep space laboratories. It was never allowed to fade. The lesson had been bought at too high a cost. Then decades later, when the memory had started to dull and the urgency had begun to fade, the signal shifted again, a new pattern emerging within its quantum envelope, a change that echoed across listening posts, triggering silent alarms and waking dormant protocols. Encoded within the new transmission were coordinates deep in uncharted space, beyond even the edge where the Star Weaver had made its final stand. These coordinates pulsed with energy signatures, familiar yet subtly different, as if humanity's final act had not been the end, but the beginning of a longer chain. A path not just for warning, but for understanding. Researchers scrambled to interpret it, to overlay the patterns with the old human records, the equations, the field fluctuations, the containment models. What they found was incomplete. Not a breach, not yet, but a slow erosion of the barriers in a distant region where no ships traveled, where no colonies had taken root yet. And there, in that emptiness, something moved subtle at first. A flicker of light bending in ways it should not space, curving around nothing. Then came the sound, not through air, not through normal frequency, but through the same quantum signature, as the original signal layered beneath the encoded coordinates was a single phrase repeated over and over like a heartbeat, preparing itself to be heard again. They're returning. And so the response began, not with panic, but with purpose. Fleets were readied, science vessels dispatched, containment protocols rehearsed for the first time in decades, not as theory, but as immediate plan. Because this time, there was no need to convince anyone of the threat the story had already been told. The sacrifice already made. And remembered now came the moment to act before the choice was taken from them again, and in the council chambers where policy was shaped and alliances forged. The leaders of the galaxy made a decision that would have once been unthinkable. They would not run. Not yet. They would go to the edge, to the place where the thinning began, and attempt what humanity had never been given time to attempt. They would understand what lay beyond the barriers, not to open it, but to prevent it, to create not just a seal, but a permanent shield, one that did not require planetary sacrifice. One that could hold without extinction. It was a bold plan. One rooted in the same defiant spirit that had driven humanity to act in its final days. And it came with great risk, but this time they had the advantage. They had the signal, they had the data, and they had the memory of what came before, and that memory guided their every step. Not with fear, but with respect and responsibility. Years passed as the research unfolded. Breakthroughs made, setbacks endured. The coordinates proved to be more than just a location. They were a key to understanding the nature of the entities themselves, not as monsters, but as consequences. Not as creatures to be slain, but as inevitabilities, born from breaches in a law more fundamental than gravity itself. And through this lens, the galaxy began to change, no longer viewing the entities as invaders, but as results of broken boundaries of balance undone. It reframed everything. The original warning was still true. Run until you are ready to pay the price, but now they saw another path. Not one that ignored the cost, but one that prepared for it, that planned and adapted and grew to meet it. And in the end, that was the legacy of the Starweaver. Not just in the moment of sacrifice, but in what it taught, the future, in how it shaped the mindset of those who listened. The story became a parable not of loss, but of responsibility. And in time, it found its way into every corner of education. Every level of governance, a tale, not just of what was faced, but of what was overcome and what could be prevented. And so, when the next anomaly arose, when the sensors once again blinked red and the signal once again shifted, they were ready not with weapons, not with fear, but with resolve and unity. They moved to the breach, not to seal it in desperation, but to reinforce it, with understanding, with preparation, with the kind of strength that comes not from force, but from knowledge and remembrance. And through their actions, the final lesson of humanity was fulfilled, that the greatest power a civilization can wield is not its technology or its armies, but its willingness to bear the cost of protecting something greater than itself, to run not from fear, but toward the chance to preserve what must be kept whole forever in our own world. We too are explorers of the unknown. We push boundaries, we seek energy and progress and understanding, and yet within that pursuit lies the same danger, the temptation to unlock before we understand, to experiment before we respect. And the story of the Star Weaver echoes as a reminder that discovery without caution leads not to growth, but to ruin. And so the lesson is clear. The greatest discoveries demand the greatest responsibility. The greatest power demands restraint, and the true measure of our wisdom is not how far we go, but whether we know when to stop, and if we must run, then let it be with purpose, not escape. And if we must choose, then let it be with the strength to protect not just ourselves, but everything that comes after. Because some doors must remain closed, and some sacrifices must be remembered, not just to honor the past, but to preserve the future.